friends to VBS and your neighbors and people to VBS, and we'll have a good time with that. All right, Ruth chapter 3. Before we get into the text, I want to explicitly restate what has been the overall theme of Ruth, which I've really tried to bring out, but I want to do it a little bit more explicitly tonight, which is centered on the word. There's a way that the Hebrews say this that I just don't think I have the capability of saying it. It's got that sort of harsh H, sort of I can't do it, the hesed, but they have that harsh H sound, which is how it really is supposed to be said, which appears 3 times in the book of Ruth. You may be familiar with this word. It is one of the most important words, if not the single most important word in the Old Testament. Actually, it can't be the most important word. That would be the name of God. But other than the name of God, the most important word, which is translated a bunch of ways in the Old Testament. Steadfast love, I think, is probably the most familiar. Of course, the psalm, there's that psalm that says, give thanks to the Lord for he is good, his steadfast love endures forever, and then it just keeps repeating that line, right? His steadfast love, that's this word hesed. A lot of older translations use the word loving kindness. That word loving kindness, if you ever see that word, it's this Hebrew word, hesed. Sometimes it's translated loyalty. Sometimes it's translated kindness. We'll see that in the book of Ruth, translated as kindness. A lot of times it's simply translated love. Especially when it is applied to God in the Old Testament, it is this steadfast love or loving kindness. When it is a human who has this quality, it is often kindness or loyalty or love. God's love, loyalty, and kindness, again this word hesed, are often manifested or expressed in how God's people treat one another with love, loyalty, and kindness. And this is the main theme of Ruth, in that God's steadfast love is expressed through the steadfast love and loyalty of his people. And this is really a theme all throughout the Old Testament as God is trying to get Israel to be holy as he is holy, right? And a lot of the commands in the Old Testament, especially as you read through the book of Leviticus, it is a little bit in Exodus when he says some of the introductory commands in Exodus, but especially through Leviticus, a lot of the commands simply end with, this is the law, for I am the Lord. And that's how it ends. That's the justification. You treat people this way, for I am the Lord. And it's tied to God's identity and character. And the thing specifically about his identity and character is this steadfast love or loving kindness that endures forever, never ends. His steadfast love, which never ends. Of course, John in the New Testament is not using the word hesed, but this idea of love as a characteristic of God. 1 John 4, 7, and 8, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. Whoever loves has been born of God and knows God, and anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. This attribute of God is the thing that he is trying to get his people to do, to express this kind of love because he has this kind of love. And so we've looked at it already. We're not going to reread the commands that are relevant for the book of Ruth. The commands regarding the gleaning, the commands regarding the treatment of the sojourner and the widow in Israel. And again, a lot of those commands with you will treat the sojourner and the widow this way because I am the Lord, because this is who I am and I expect you to be this way. And also connected to when he talks about the sojourner, especially the sojourner and the poor, you're going to treat them well because you were a sojourner in Egypt and I brought you out, which again is reemphasizing the point, and really we see this throughout the book of Ruth, that God's people were intended to be the avenues through which God's love was expressed. God did love them directly, and God loves each of us directly, he to us. But he also intends us to be an indirect avenue of God's love as we love one another. So, the book of Ruth, as we've been going through, doesn't use the word hesed often. It comes up in this chapter, which is why I wanted to bring it up as we get to Ruth chapter 3. As Boaz and Ruth are both examples of this principle. The book really centers, as we've said, on Naomi. Naomi's transition from the word Naomi, which is pleasant or delightful, that's her name at the beginning, to call me Mara, which means bitter. Because of the way that God has treated her, she feels bitter and resentful and very in despair. And her journey back to Naomi, pleasant or delightful, is accomplished because Ruth demonstrates this loving kindness to her, and Boaz demonstrates this loving kindness. They are the instruments through which God will bless and bring Naomi back out of her despair. Ruth chapter 3. Of course, Ruth and Boaz have already met. Boaz owns fields that Ruth was gleaning in, and Ruth, of course, was gleaning in his fields, and he met her, and they had a little interaction, and she goes back to Naomi, and Naomi's like, oh, he's a redeemer, and this could work out really well, and you could begin to see the wheels turning in Naomi's mind as soon as Boaz is introduced into the story. This might be an avenue through which she can be a blessing to Ruth. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about Naomi feels this bitterness and this despair. Call me Mara. And yet we still see that she is seeking the benefit of Ruth. She is seeking something good for Ruth. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? See, he's winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. The word relative here is not the same that we use to call Boaz a redeemer. This is a generic term that puts Boaz in the clan of Elimelech. We read that in chapter 2. Her plural use of the word our is interesting. He is our relative. Naomi, who is an Israelite by birth and came from Israel, versus Ruth, who is, of course, not a Israelite at all. She's a Moabite. And one of the things that the story really drives home over and over and keeps repeating this, Ruth the Moabite. She's called the Moabite just as often as she's called Ruth. Naomi is including her in this family connection where perhaps other people would not have done that. Again, Ruth the Moabite. Naomi is including her in the group. And Naomi is recognizing or calling back to chapter 1, verse 9, when she said to Ruth and Orpah, the Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. And she was saying that in the beginning, go back home. Don't come with me. I have no rest for you. I have nothing for you if you come with me to Israel. Orpah and Ruth, you need to stay back behind in Moab and find a husband and you'll find rest. But, of course, Ruth has come with her, and Naomi is now thinking, okay, I have an opportunity here to be a blessing to Ruth. In the midst of her despair, in the midst of her bitterness, she's still thinking about how she can be a blessing to others. Should I not seek rest for you? And so she is thinking she knows the connection to Boaz. Ruth probably had no idea. Ruth didn't have any idea about the kinsman laws, the redeemer laws, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Ruth is probably unaware of the significance of that. It's Naomi who's going to have the information that Ruth needs. So Naomi puts together this plot. Ruth, verse 3. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies, and then go uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say I will do. Now, these are the verses that cause perhaps the most consternation in commentaries and traditionally interpreting the book. What is the intent here? The story is framed in such a way that Naomi's intent is somewhat obscured. Like, what does she think is going to happen here? There's a question of why not just approach Boaz on Ruth's behalf. Naomi knows who Boaz is. Boaz is in the clan of Elimelech, which Naomi, of course, is in that clan, right? They're in the same family setting. So why not just approach on Ruth's behalf instead of going through this weird cloak and dagger sort of hidden thing overnight? Perhaps she wants to see how Boaz will react. She's not sure. Boaz is in a position of power over Ruth and Naomi. Ruth and Naomi are low on the totem pole in Israel. Boaz seems to be relatively high. He's an owner of land. He's in the aristocracy, their equivalent of the aristocracy, it seems, where he is relatively wealthy. So perhaps not wanting to be putting him in a position where if he's not going to react well, there will be some public consequence. There is a gracious or a pessimistic way to interpret the book. Some have suggested that this is an attempt to sort of manipulate or entrap Boaz in sort of a compromising position. I don't think there's anything in the behavior of Ruth or Naomi that would warrant that, though, that sort of interpretation of the book. I think that Ruth and Naomi, as, again, low on the totem pole, have to act in such a way that exhibits some caution because they are at the mercy, for the most part, of the generosity of others. They're at the mercy of what a man like Boaz, his generosity toward them. And if Boaz does not like them, he can make their life pretty miserable if he so desires. So I think Ruth and Naomi here are exhibiting some caution as they approach this situation. Verse 6. She went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Doesn't even go home. He just eats, and he's so tired, and he's feeling good, and he just goes and lies down on the ground. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid down. He's worked hard all day. The scene is very vivid. He's worked hard all day. Perhaps she has too. She might have gone home to change after the day's labor. Remember, Naomi told her to wash and anoint herself and put on new clothes, right? So Naomi wants Ruth to really present herself well. So perhaps Ruth has worked all day. She's gone home to change. Boaz is just sort of laying there. He's in a good mood. And again, the significance of meeting him alone, I think, does two things. One, it heightens Ruth's vulnerability and trust. She is demonstrating a level of trust in Boaz, where if Boaz is the kind of man who, as he has already noted, Boaz noted in chapter 2, there are some in Israel who would take advantage of a woman like Ruth, who Boaz specifically says, stay in my fields, and Naomi reiterates this to Ruth at the end of chapter 2, stay in Boaz's fields, because some men in other places in Israel are going to take advantage of you. They will assault or molest, depending on your translation. This is a demonstration on Ruth's behalf of the trust that she has in Boaz, that she's willing to be alone with him in this situation, and trust that he's not going to take advantage of her in that way. Second, it removes the social pressure from his answer. She is making this appeal to Boaz by herself, alone at night, which could be somewhat compromising, but what it does is it allows Boaz to answer without the pressure of others around to influence what he might say. She is, in some ways it seems this is going to be the best possible response out of Boaz, to dig at really his genuine feelings about the matter, instead of being influenced by what other people think. If Naomi goes and talks to him in public, or Ruth approaches him in public, he might be pressured by the social pressures around him to give a different answer than he otherwise would. Approaching him alone in this way, in secret, ensures that they're going to get the real truth of what Boaz thinks, the real truth of what he feels. And so she does this. She just is trusting Naomi entirely. Verse 8, at midnight the man was startled and turned over. Startled probably because his feet got cold. Who likes sleeping with cold feet? The answer is none of us. So he gets startled and turns over, and behold, I like the way that this is phrased. The ESV does a good job of this. With the exclamation point at the end of that verse there, he turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Like he's like, wow, what is this? There's a woman right here. And he said, who are you? It's dark. He can't just switch a lamp on to figure out who it is. She answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are Redeemer. The invitation that Ruth, and I don't know if she planned this ahead of time. I really wish we had a little bit more insight, I've said this often, into the mental processes of the characters in the Bible stories, because the stories are relatively short. And I would just like to know, did Ruth plan this out? Was it providential? Did Naomi give her the words to say? But Ruth, her invitation here to spread your wings over your servant calls to mind Boaz's own words in chapter 2. Ruth 2:12, Boaz says to Ruth, the Lord repay you for what you've done, that is for helping Naomi, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Essentially what Ruth is inviting him to do is to make good on his own prayer. You have said that I deserve to be repaid. I've come to the Lord for refuge under his wings. And Ruth is essentially saying, okay, you can do that. You do that. You've prayed for God to bless me, under whose wings I've come to take refuge. Spread your wings over me and be that instrument of God's blessing. And again, this emphasizes the main theme of Ruth, which is that God's providential care in many cases, perhaps most cases, comes through his people. His people who are acting righteously and doing what he wants are the very ones who provide the promises and the blessings that God has made to his people. We are the ones who enact the promises of God if we have the attitude of Boaz and Ruth. And that is, again, the thing that Boaz and Naomi, too, as we should note, all the characters in the story are thinking about how they can be a blessing to others. Even Naomi, the bitter, despairing woman, is thinking about how she can be a blessing to others. The language evokes something like Ezekiel 16:8, which makes we're going to talk about, not next week. Next week is Mother's Day. The week after next, on Sunday morning, we're going to talk about the image of the church as the bride of Christ, which is, again, an image that is evoked a lot in the Old Testament, the marriage relationship as an analogy for the relationship between God and his people. Ezekiel 16:8, when I passed by you again and saw you, this is God speaking of Israel, behold, you are at age for love, and I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine. And I bathed you with water and washed off your blood from you, anointed you with oil. The language used throughout the story of Ruth evokes in the reader an obvious sense of marriage and the providence of marriage, especially as it relates to God's providential care from the very beginning of the story in chapter 1. Ruth and Naomi and Orpah are devastated because of the dissolution of their marriages. Not that they divorced, but their husbands died. And that was the main cause for them to have to move back, as they had no way to provide for themselves. And again, Naomi urges Ruth and Orpah to stay behind because she has no marriageable prospects in Israel. I have no one for you to marry if you come back with me. So Ruth and Orpah, you stay here and find husbands. May you find rest in the house of your husband. Ruth decides to come. Naomi comes. They are at the mercy of a society where they are not able really to provide for themselves. They are at the mercy of the generosity of the Israelites. And then this eligible bachelor just shows up on the scene. And of course, we understand that's providence. We understand that this is God's design. But in the flow of the story, Boaz is the stand-in for God in his relationship and his providence with Israel. It is an extension. I just said all that. So at this point, let's talk about the word redeemer, because this is the word that makes, I think, this analogy between Boaz and God as the providers of providential care. This is the word that really makes that connection most poignant. This word goal, I'm not going to keep saying it, is a word that is not ever in the rest of the Old Testament. And this is a significant point. You are a redeemer. Naomi calls him, he is a redeemer. This is not a word that is ever connected to marriage throughout the rest of the Old Testament. It is only connected to marriage in the book of Ruth. This is a word that concerns throughout the rest of the Old Testament the rights and privileges of clanship. And it comes up in a number of ways outside of the book of Ruth. Numbers 35:12, this word appears. The city shall be for you a refuge from the avenger. This word avenger, translated avenger in Numbers 35, is this word goal, which we don't really, we don't translate it this way, but it would be appropriate if we were being consistent in our translation. The city shall be for you a refuge from the Redeemer. That is, this word had to do with the rights and the privileges that came from being in the same clan. And in this case, it was the right of vengeance, the right to pursue those who had killed part of your family. The cities of refuge, of course, for those who did that accidentally, you can go to the cities of refuge. You won't have to fear the avenger, the manslayer, or rather that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment. But this word avenger is the word goal. This is the same word that is used to describe Boaz as the redeemer. It's used in the context of wrongdoing and restitution is this word. It's the same root word here in Numbers 5:8. Somebody is wronged, the family is wronged. If a man has no next of kin to whom restitution may be made for the wrong, the restitution for wrong shall go to the Lord, to the priest, for the priest, rather, in addition to the ram of atonement with which atonement is made for him. This had to do with sort of settlement in disputes, things that went wrong in society. This word restitution comes from the same root as goal, which again had to do with somebody did something wrong, and your ability to make that right was connected to if you're kin of the person and the family privileges. It's also used in Leviticus 25 to describe land, the land promise. And this word mostly applies in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy to the land promise. If your brother becomes poor and sells part of his property, his nearest redeemer, that is Goal, shall come and redeem what his brother has sold. As they use this word outside of Ruth, this word was mostly concerned with how clans treated each other and what rights and responsibilities and privileges came from being in the same family. Which is why it's so significant in the book of Ruth, and the story makes sure that you understand this, that Boaz is a relative of Elimelech. That is, Boaz and Naomi are of the same clan and tribe. And so there is a connection, legal connection, familial connection in Israel that Boaz has some either responsibility or privilege towards Naomi. As it will become clear, it's not at all certain that what Ruth and Naomi mean when they call Boaz a redeemer is the so-called Levirate marriage in mind when she uses this word, you are a redeemer, spread your wings over me for you are a redeemer. Rather, as a member of the same clan as Elimelech, Boaz had I just said all this. Why don't I advance my notes, guys? You guys should tell me to advance my notes more. Boaz had certain responsibilities toward Naomi. And as we've seen some of these principles throughout the book, emphasizing again the main theme here, that God's chesed, again, his steadfast love, his kindness, is manifested through the steadfast love and kindness that the people of Israel showed each other. This was a symbol, the family love and the family responsibilities that connected Israel together were the same kinds of things that God was expressing towards the Israelites as his children. He had responsibilities and privileges and things that he would do for them. So this word is often used, this word goal, is often used to describe God and his actions in the Old Testament, emphasizing that this is, again, less about marriage. This word goal is less about marriage and more about general concern for family. And God uses this word to describe himself often. We'll read a couple of them. We're not going to read a bunch. Psalm 77:14. You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. With your arm, you with your arm redeemed your people. This is that word goal, to redeem or to have this sort of connection of blessing. The children of Jacob and Joseph. Isaiah 41:13, I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, fear not, I am the one who helps you. Fear not, you worm Jacob. That is, they're very low compared to God. As Boaz is much higher than Ruth and Naomi. Fear not, you worm Jacob, you men of Israel. I am the one who helps you, declares the Lord. Your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. That when there is a dispute or a problem, when there is an injustice, God makes it right. And that is how the word is used, right? When there's a selling of land that needs to stay in the clan, deserves to stay in the family because the land allotment and the land promise, there's an inappropriate injustice that has happened, the Redeemer can buy that land back. When there is an unjust killing, somebody is killed, the Redeemer, the Goal, is the one who is allowed to enact justice and vengeance in that situation. And when there is a legal dispute or a right, something that needs to be made right, that again is the Redeemer, the one who is restitution is made for, is the Goal. God is the one when there is injustice, when there is something wrong in Israel. God is the one who makes it right. God is the one who does what is necessary to make that situation just again. And so, I don't know how much of this Ruth has in mind. I definitely think Naomi would have in mind. And Boaz, as we'll see, definitely understands this. Ruth as a foreigner, somebody who didn't grow up with the laws and the customs of Israel. It's hard to know how much of this Ruth has in mind. And of course, one of the things about the time of the judges is that they were not doing this for the most part. Remember, in the time of the judges, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. I suspect a lot of what's going on in the time of the judges is this stuff is not happening. The stuff concerning the Redeemer and all the rights and privileges of family, people are not doing that because everybody's doing what they want. Everybody's doing what's right to them. So Boaz stands out as one who is embodying the righteousness of God. Verse 10, Boaz's response. May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness. I have underlined and italicized kindness because this is chesed. the steadfast love. This is that word. This is one of the 3 times it appears. This last steadfast love or kindness or loyalty is greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do all that you ask, for my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And the question is, what was so chesed, this steadfast love? What was so good about Ruth's actions here? And the way that he reacts is kind of interesting. This proposal to cover me with your wings, which clearly is evoking marriage language. This proposal, Boaz says, is greater than the first. And, of course, the first question would be, what's the first kindness? This is the second, or the last. What would be the first kindness? Well, one thing that Boaz has already said, and again connected to this word chesed, is Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi. That's the first act of kindness or steadfast love, is that Ruth did not stay in Moab. Ruth came with Naomi and was a blessing to Naomi. That's what he's referring to in the first kindness. And as a foreigner, Ruth didn't necessarily have to marry someone in Naomi's clan. She could have stayed in Moab. And when she comes to Israel, she doesn't necessarily have to marry in the clan. She's a foreigner. She's a Moabite. Again, the story goes out of its way to make sure that you remember that. Ruth didn't necessarily need to continue helping Naomi, but her approach of Boaz is as much about helping Naomi as it is about helping herself. Because if Ruth marries Boaz, that solidifies the responsibility of Boaz as a redeemer, not in the sense of marriage, but in the sense of providing for one's family and making things right in the family. So, her appeal to Boaz, I think Boaz interprets this as, not that her kindness is towards him, but her kindness is towards Naomi, in that Ruth is pursuing the man who is in the best position to help not only herself, but to help Naomi, and to continue to be a blessing to Naomi, which is why he repeats this phrase. I know, all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. Evokes what he's already said before when he met her in chapter 2. Yeah, I know who you are, because everybody knows who you are because you're helping Naomi. That's the thing that made her stand out. She is a worthy woman in the same way that Boaz in chapter 2 is called a worthy man. And what makes her so worthy? If we go to Proverbs 31 verse 12, we think about some of the attributes that are listed there that would describe Ruth. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it's yet night and provides food for her household. Ruth is not married yet, but this is the way that she's acting towards Naomi. She's working hard and bringing food from afar. She's going into the fields and she's gathering, not for her husband and her children, but for her mother-in-law. She's providing and doing what was necessary. Strength and dignity are her clothing. She laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Ruth could have turned back, but rather than fear what might happen in Israel as she leaves her homeland and comes with Naomi, Ruth demonstrated a view of the future not driven by fear or pessimism, as might have been the case with Orpah. Naomi tries really hard to get Orpah and Ruth to stay behind because Naomi has nothing to offer. But this loyalty and the kindness of Ruth, looking to the future, not driven by fear, but driven by love, driven by the love that she has for Naomi. Verse 12, it is true, this is Boaz speaking, that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. And Boaz does connect this term goal with the Levirate marriage, as will the ceremony that we'll see in chapter 4. Boaz takes this word that was generically applied most of the time to simply family responsibilities and applies it specifically to the marriage relationship in a way that Ruth probably would not have understood, being a foreigner. It is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight and in the morning. If he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. One of the things that the story does really well is emphasize Boaz as a man of integrity, especially concerning God's law. Boaz may want to marry Ruth. Boaz has maybe, quote unquote, the first shot, but he understands that there's laws that cannot just be ignored. You can't just ignore the law because of what you want. And so Boaz, despite what he may desire, is willing to put what is right, what God's law says, ahead of his own desires. And he demonstrates that over and over in the story, that Boaz is willing to do what the right thing is. Lie down until morning, and so she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Why urge her to wait? Why conceal her presence? I think he wants to allow this to be resolved before rumors can spread, right? It doesn't take much for rumors to spread. And I think he doesn't want there to be this idea or this implication, sort of a shotgun marriage sort of a deal, that they've had an inappropriate relationship and that's why he's pursuing her, that's why he wants to marry her. He wants this to be resolved in a way that it is as clear as possible that what Boaz is doing is an act of righteousness and not an act of sin. Again, Boaz is very concerned with doing the things that God wants. Verse 15, he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. You kind of don't get in the story if you don't know how the measures are. He's loading her up so much that they kind of have to put the pack on her back first and then fill it up. And then he has to sort of cinch up the pack because he's giving her so much stuff that she wouldn't be able to lift it up onto her back. So he's giving her so much stuff. She went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? And she told her all the man had done for her, saying, and we don't see this at the beginning, but in the second part, these 6 measures of barley he gave me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Boaz recognizes that this relationship is not just about him and Ruth. Ruth's actions are designed in large part to be a blessing for Naomi. And Boaz is saying, in all the things that he does, that he understands that. He understands that this is not just about him and Ruth, but this is about his ability to be a blessing as a redeemer. Again, the word redeemer, not in the sense of marriage just to Ruth, but a redeemer in the sense of one who makes the family injustice right, not just for Ruth, but for Naomi. He's really relative of Naomi. He's not really relative of Ruth at all. And so he makes this clear by giving this barley to Ruth to say, don't go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. It's not just Ruth who's in need. It's just, again, about Naomi as well. Everyone in the story manifests this steadfast love, this loyalty, this kindness on behalf of the others, and thus serves as conduits of God's own steadfast love and loyalty. And this, again, I think is one of the main themes of the book of Ruth, is that God demonstrates his love through the people, us, who are willing to show it to others. We bless others because God has blessed us. We show others steadfast loyalty and kindness because God has shown us steadfast loyalty and kindness. And one of the things that he is intending for us to do as his people is to show that love to others as a means of showing them God's love, as a means of showing them who God is. Verse 20. She said to them, as we go back to this is chapter 1, verse 20. There's an interesting parallel. He says, you must not go back empty-handed. Remember what Naomi said when she came back? She said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. And the parallelism between chapter 1 and chapter 3, she comes back empty, and Boaz is going to refill her life. She's going to be the one that God uses. She feels so betrayed and bitter, not betrayed maybe, but bitter and resentful that God has done this thing to her. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? But it is through Boaz that she will be not empty anymore. She'll be made full again. And so we see Naomi go to Mara and back again. The word, as in 3:17, you must not go back empty-handed. God reversing Naomi's tragedy through godly people, through the loyalty of Ruth and through the loyalty of Boaz. The question that we'll end with: how can or do we manifest God's steadfast love or loving kindness or loyalty to other people around us? As you think about this week, the people in your life that are struggling with whatever it is that they're struggling with, I don't know, you know the people better than I do, people in your life. What opportunities do you have to show God's love to them? To be a blessing to them. Even, and this is maybe the most powerful part of the whole story, Naomi, who is in the depths of her bitterness, who is still thinking about Ruth. How can I be a blessing to Ruth? Who's still thinking about Orpah. How can I be a blessing to Orpah? The things that go on in our lives that are horrible and terrible, the tragedies that we have, God wants to use each of us to be a blessing to each other. And so I'd encourage you as we conclude to think about how you can do that this week, how you can be an example of God's love to those around us. We'll wrap up Ruth next week. I'm very excited to get to the conclusion of the story. It's not very often that a sandal has a dramatic portion to play in a Bible story. You can come back for that in chapter 4. As we offer the invitation, I don't know what it is that you've got in your life, the struggles that you have, but we want to be God's instruments of kindness, don't we? We want to do that for you tonight if we need to. And so if you need